Hello, today we are going to be talking about PCI 4.0 and some of the new challenges and pitfalls that we're looking at today. My name is Ty Hewley. I am the technical manager here at Optiv for PCI Advisory Services. I've been doing PCI since version 1.0. So let's jump into this here a little bit. Let's first look at the timeline. The critical times and dates that I want you to kind of recognize here is one that PCI 4.0 has already gone live as of March of 2022, but you can't do attestation work yet. So no QSA company can do any attestation work until July / August of 2022 when the PCI SSC authorizes that. And for them to do that, they all have to be trained. Every QSA has to be trained on 4.0 as well, which the training doesn't start until July, August timeframe. So we haven't even gotten our training schedule yet to see that. But what we can do is we can do gap analysis and we can do readiness assessments to make sure that you're ready for PCI 4.0. We know what that standard looks like. We've seen it. We know what the rocks are going to look like and so forth. Other things to note here is most of these new PCI 4.0 requirements, they are considered evolving requirements. So most of them will not even be enforced until Q1 of 2025. And that's usually, so when 3.2.1 gets phased out, and then we've got a few months, and then we're going to start enforcing the 4.0 requirements as of Q1 2025. All right, let's go ahead and cover a few other areas. So the two biggest changes that I see in the 4.0 requirement, it's more of an ideology and a way of going about assessing and a methodology type of thing. So I wanted to highlight these two areas, which is the customized approach control and the targeted risk analysis. The customized approach control, this is much like a compensating control, but it's really just a control that was applied that's different than what PCI SSC has specified. So a company may have implemented biometrics instead of 12-character passwords. So now we have to take a look at how that biometrics was implemented and the controls and validate that that is meeting the same intent as the 12-character password and then it's as strong as it. So there's a lot of things you've got to do to test and validate that that control is effective. And one of those is applying the targeted risk analysis. So the targeted risk analysis applies for all customized approach controls, and then it also applies to all the frequency and periodic timetable controls within PCI. So one of the things people may not be expecting is when they get ready to do their annual PCI assessments is that they have to already have gone through a risk analysis for all those PCI requirements where there's a frequency or periodic setting that needed to be applied. So those all have to be figured out. And then you got to do a business impact analysis as well as a likelihood that that frequency or that setting is appropriate. So to get more information, I'm not going to go much more than that, is you can go to the back of the PCI DSS standards. Let me just go ahead and escape out of here so you can see this. You can go to the you can go to the PCI DSS, and this is the Appendix D. Talks all about the customized approach and what you as the merchant and customer has to do or service provider has to do, and then what the assessor is going to do to test and analyze that area. And then you also need to look at the Appendix E, which is the templates that you got to use for your customized approach. So you got to create this sampling controls matrix for every customized control. You have to use this form. So make sure you download it and get this form from their website here, and I'll give you those references at the end of our presentation. And then when you perform a targeted risk analysis, you have to have somebody come in and do the targeted risk analysis, preferably a QSA, but not the same QSA that's doing your attestation work. They got to be two different, and they got to show, you know, that they're separate. So they're going to need to use this form, and they're going to need to complete that for every frequency area, every customized approach control. So enough about those two big ones there. I'm going to jump back into the presentation here. Okay. Next thing that's also a challenge that we see out there for customers is how to do a proper scope reduction, how to look at your business and say, hey, do I have to satisfy every PCI requirement? And the truth is most customers don't. As a matter of fact, the PCI SSC created all these self-assessment questionnaires based on different types of businesses out there. So if you do not store any electronic cardholder data, then you qualify for scope reduction. If you do store electronic cardholder data, then all 500 PCI requirements are going to apply to your business for the most part. And that's a huge jump from requirement 3. Or PCI DSS 3.2.1, which had about 370 PCI requirements. So just know we got like 130 more PCI requirements with 4.0. So keep that in mind. You want to try and remove cardholder data out of your environment wherever possible. And you might see a common theme with me today to outsource, your data processing and your cardholder data processing if it's appropriate. Next area where you can see if you apply for a scope reduction is if you have any payment applications that don't store credit card data, but maybe credit card data is passing through them. A case in point might be a retail payment application, or a restaurant payment application where the POS is connected to these workstations, and there's an application on that where credit card data is going clear text right into those payment applications and then being forwarded to the payment provider. Well, good news is now most of these payment applications can still be used, but they can be taken out of scope if those customers start implementing these P2PE devices, which encrypts these credit cards right at the insert or swipe, so that those payment applications no longer see these clear text credit card data. And if anything, they're just getting token information back from the payment gateway or transaction ID. So that's another way that you can quickly reduce your scope. But however, if you do have any type of payment application or customer record management application or internal application where you're processing credit card information through it, you would qualify for a SAC-C. A SAC-CVT qualification is really for like workstations and call centers where they're connecting to a third-party cloud, such as software as a service or infrastructure as a service environment, where the payment application is hosted up there in that cloud or at the payment gateway. So in those scenarios, you're really looking at those workstation environments and making sure that those workstations are hardened and secure to accept those payments. If you have an e-commerce environment and you're hosting your own payment pages, you're looking at the SAC AEP, which is a lot of requirements. It's probably a good 60%, 65% of the PCI requirements would apply to you. Whereas if you outsource the payment page to the payment gateway or payment provider or use their iframes or redirects, you would qualify for a SAC A, which is about 20% of all the PCI requirements. So that's a huge scope reduction. So where possible, use the payment gateways, iframes, and redirects if you can. POS environments, there's IP and Wi-Fi connected POSs. Many of those still don't encrypt, but they're plugged into your network, so it requires lots of segmentation controls. And so in a BIP SAC environment, you're looking at a good 60, 65% of the PCI requirements are going to apply to you because of all those segmentation controls. Whereas a dial-up or cellular, all that credit card transactions are being processed off your network on the POTS line or on a cellular line. So maybe you're looking at maybe 25% of the PCI requirements applying to you. In a P2PE environment, those are IP connected terminals, but because the credit card data is encrypted right when it's inserted into the machine or when it's swiped, it removes everything on your internal network from being inside PCI scope. So you're really only looking at about 20% of those of the PCI requirements really applying to you in that scenario or in that environment. Okay, so now I want to just go ahead and take a look at inside the PCI DSS and kind of drill down a little bit into all the new requirements. I'm running at about 8 minutes and 30 seconds right now, so I'm going to try and cover as many of these as I can. This is just an Excel export of the 4.0 requirements, and it references 321, so I can kind of show you how everything is kind of changed. On a quick note, if you memorized all the 321 requirement numbers, you're going to have to memorize them all over again for 4.0 because they've all changed. There's almost no requirements that are identical from last PCI 321 that has the same reference number, I should say. So case in point, in the old 321 standard, they'd always have these check for additional security policies and operating procedures at the end of the domain. Now it's the first requirement of every domain, and then they've tacked on a new requirement for every domain except for 1 and 12 to have roles and responsibilities applied to those controls inside of every domain. So if you have a PCI policy, the quick recommendation here is make sure inside your security policy, you're addressing all the PCI domains and you're attaching roles and responsibilities for every PCI domain out there. That's my quick advice. It's a documented control, so I'm going to be very verbose. Everything that's in yellow here is basically something that has changed, and it's more like either the requirements have been merged together or they've been split apart or there's been some kind of clarification, but the intent of the requirement really hasn't changed. What we're really looking for today is any of these orange highlighted cells. That's where they've added new bullets or new audit procedures or testing procedures or strengthen the control or something along those lines. It's a new requirement. So case in point, roles and responsibilities is now the second requirement in domain 2, which is vendor defaults. There was no roles and responsibilities inside a vendor default domain before, so now that's considered a new requirement. So we already covered that in 1, and that same logic applies to all the domains here. So I'm going to keep scrolling through here until I get to some more orange requirements. Okay, we got roles and responsibilities again inside of data storage. And then the first real new requirement for you here is account data storage is kept to a minimum. That was always there, but now they really want you to be able to identify the location of all your cardholder data, especially sensitive authentication data if you're using it at all for pre-authorization, or if you're an issuing servicer, or which is basically a company that issues credit cards to their cardholder members. They can store SAD, but as you guys recall, there is no SAD storage post-authorization, and that's still true to date. So my quick recommendation here is make sure you come up with a cardholder data storage matrix. So everywhere that cardholder data is being used or temporary stored, that you make a note of where it's being temporary stored and located. You should always know where all your cardholder data is, even if it's at a third party. So that's my quick recommendation here. I'm gonna keep scrolling down. There's a few of these data storage requirements. In the past, if you were temporary storing SAD while waiting for a payment to be processed, maybe it's in a memory or in a cache file, there really wasn't any guidance or control about how to store that quick memory cache data. Now they're enforcing you to encrypt the SAD even in pre-authorization. So my recommendation is if you have an old legacy POS or POI device, upgrade to a P2PE system because that's encrypted right when it's inserted. Or if you have an e-commerce environment or a payment page that you're collecting it, the cardholder data for whatever reason, I would recommend that you use the payment provider payment gateway to make your payments on. That way they're being entered right there on the payment gateway site and it's not your environment at all. And then you don't have to deal with any cost with legacy upgrades and legacy maintenance and writing new code and so forth. So that's my quick recommendation for you there. Okay. Again, with the SAD storage, this is really applying to issuers. They didn't really give a lot of guidance in the past. Now you've got to have a legitimate issuing business need to secure the SAD data, and it has to be encrypted. So now they're saying you got to be encrypting your SAD data. Issuing banks used to get away with a lot in the past, not anymore. Okay, when using remote access technologies, we got to prevent the copying and relocation of the PAN. And they say, except for, people that have a legitimate business need, like a DBA or somebody with privileged access. To be honest, with today's technology, most of your web applications and most people are getting access to their applications remotely via web browsers and secure browsers. Those should all be masking the credit card. There's really no need to see the full PAN in any case, unless you are a DBA. But if you are a DBA, I would even say go a step further and make sure there's a jump box or jump station or some kind of control in there where you're only transferring files from server to server inside the cardholder data environment, and that you're not downloading full credit card databases to your workstation where you can copy it onto a removable media or storage type of thing. So if at possible, implement the GPOs and the access control list that prevent the download of file transfers over public infrastructures to remote offices or workstations, and enforce those admins and DBAs to use secure jump boxes, virtual terminal scenarios to move files back and forth between servers and production and test environments. Okay, so hashes. In the past, you could do encrypted hashes. Now they want to have associated key management processes and procedures associated with the hashes. So if you are storing cardholder data, my recommendation is you outsource it if possible. But if you don't have associated key management, otherwise you should be upgrading your encryption software to support key management. And that includes your whole key management architecture and your crypto architecture, which can be a daunting task. So that's why I'm saying, if possible, outsource. But if you have to do it in-source, make sure you've got the associated key management procedures and strong encryption protocols implemented for that environment. Okay, if you're doing disk level or partitioning encryption, they basically added this bullet that you can do that on removable electronic media. Just use things like HSMs and this is also for NAS and SANs. You should be using hardware encryption modules and using some type of key management solution there. If it is a native hard drive or a non-removable electronic media, again, they're going to just reinforce it can't be the native OS admin OS software administrative rights to do the encryption. It has to be a third-party encryption software that needs to be applied to that environment. Let's see. We're getting into you have to have these cryptographic architectures if you're storing in cardholder data. So we got to know more details. So there was a requirement for service providers to have cryptographic architecture in the past. Now they just want more detail. They want to know all about the algorithms, the protocols, the keys, how to prevent the use of same cryptographic keys in production and test environments. They want to know, all about your HSMs and your key management systems and your secure cryptographic devices and key management procedures. So now I have to include all that detail. So my recommendation is, make sure you go to your cardholder data environment network diagram and add a cryptographic architecture to that diagram, or overlay that onto that network diagram, and include things like AHSM, KSMs, certificate authorities, key management storage, registration, revocation, and distribution process flows. Those things should all be added to your cryptographic architecture. Okay, scrolling down. Let's see where we're at. Okay, we're jumping into requirement 4. Let's skip over roles and responsibilities. So there's always been a requirement to have strong cryptographic protocols when working with cardholder data in transit. So if you're setting up VPNs or you're using Wi-Fi access points, now we got to make sure that you're using trusted keys and certificates are only accepted, and that those certificates use safeguard PAN during transmission over public networks. Confirm that they're valid, not expired, that you're not using insecure certificate authorities or versions or algorithms or key sizes or implementation. So many times I walk into customer environments and they've got these internal certificate authorities that have internal that usually show an insecure cryptographic service because the CA hasn't been validated or it hasn't been authenticated with a trusted CA, or there is no strong root certificate authority. So make sure you guys are implementing strong encryption. There's now more requirements that's enforcing that. I am going to break away from this little Excel spreadsheet tool to show you one of the tools that I like to use out there for cryptograph or for testing encryption over public infrastructures. So this is just a quick way, and the only reason why I'm showing you this tool is because it's quick, and there's so many requirements to show out there. So if you wanted to test like your payment provider or gateway, or even your own website or your e-commerce on how strong the encryption, this is a non-intrusive way that you can look at what your web server is requiring of your browser to have that safe and secure connection. So I'm looking at Square here. I just picked them as an example. What you do is you go out to that payment gateway or payment provider, you'd find their portal, and then you'd go to this tool called from Qualys. And so if you get this link, it's sslabs.com, and it's SSL test /. All you have to do is you paste in the website and you hit submit, and boom. This thing is going to go look and test the encryption of Square. And so you can see it's running through a process, and it takes about 3 or 4 minutes. I did another little test, I think, of Amazon, and this was the result. It said, okay, Amazon.com, you got a grade B, which means their server support is supporting TLS 1.0 and TLS 1.1. They're not enforcing strong TLS like 1.2 and 3.0. So keep that in mind if you're using Amazon. It's not that Amazon.com is the same for your AWS environment. So if you're using AWS, just validate that they're enforcing strong encryption type protocols for your environment here. But the great thing about this report is it goes down and gives you all the detail of your encryption, the certificate authorities and transparency. We're seeing that there's some DNS chain issues here, but it's telling you what's going on. It's showing that it's accepting 1.1 and 1.0. We're seeing some weak algorithms here. So it's a great tool, and you can probably read some false positives maybe in here, especially like if your website doesn't accept some of these like old Android devices or something, or you've got that turned off. You might see some false positives in here, but like I said, it's a great way to get a good analysis. I still go in and look at like a customer service agent's certificates and make sure that it lines up and that I'm hitting the right website and the right web server, and look at and make sure that their certificates are good on there. Let's see if we can go back. So here we got Square, they got an A+. So you just click on that report and you can see they're using 1.3, TLS 1.3, which is good. So again, you get to see everything that's going on here. I mean, they're using 1.2, I believe, in this scenario. Yeah, TLS 1.2 here. So it's kind of saying warning because I think 1.2 is on the verge of becoming weak, it looks like. So just be aware of it. And I can't remember if 4.0 uses versions anymore. I think they just say use the latest industry encryption standards now. So I would have to double check on that. But this is a good tool for testing, websites and e-commerce and payment gateways and so forth, and validating that strong encryption is being used. Okay, with that said, I'm jumping back into this tool here. I am at 24 minutes, so I only got a few minutes left, and I've not even halfway through these standards. So let me keep going through here. Got to inventory our certificates and trusted keys now. So that's now a requirement. Make sure you create that certificate inventory and key inventory. Okay, so now antivirus is called malware. So that's the big change in 4.0. They no longer use the word antivirus. In this scenario, here's where we got one of those risk analysis, targeted risk analysis scenarios. Here they're saying you should, the frequency and periodic evaluations of components identified as not at risk for malware needs to be defined based on a targeted risk analysis, right? So what does that really mean? Well, you got to go follow that appendix, I believe it's E, at the back of the PCI data security standard, and look at the impact and the likelihood that that workstation, maybe it's a Linux server or workstation, could be attacked by malware or antivirus. So some of the determining factors when doing that risk analysis, targeted risk analysis, you should look at the history of that OS. If the OS supports endpoint protection software, how often is that OS patched? And if there's any vulnerable services or high-risk services that are needed when using that tool in your cardholder data environment. Okay, there's another one here that talks about the periodic malware scan. So generally, most customers they usually scan their environment like weekly type of scenario. Here's another scenario where we need to have that targeted risk analysis to determine if a week is correct. Maybe it's a month you can do, or maybe it's daily. I don't know. But determining risk factors that you should do in your targeted risk analysis to determine how often you should be scanning your antivirus systems to make sure that they're safe and effective. I would look at history again, patch OS, vulnerability services, remote access scenarios and needs, and where that systems are located. Those are all good reasons. Another new requirement here is now they're requiring if you insert a USB drive or removable media or attach removable media, your antivirus or malware protection software, endpoint protection software should be able to auto detect a drive being plugged in and should scan and quarantine any malware or malicious software or malicious files or potential malicious files. So that's a new requirement. So if your software isn't doing that to date, make sure it has that capability. Another thing that we're going to want to look at for malware is phishing. So your malware now needs to be able to detect phishing attacks. So if it doesn't do it today, you better be asking your antivirus or malware service provider and find out when you can, and or else purchase that module and get that implemented and rolled out in your environment. Okay, let's move down to requirement 6, which is all about patching and the lifecycle management, software development. I'm going to jump down to now we're required to inventory our bespoke custom software. So make sure you're having proper inventories. There's a lot of inventory requirements now with PCI 4.0. You got certificates, you got keys, You got the assets, you've got POI, POSs, and now you also have software. My recommendation is to make sure that you're using versioning or patch management tools for software, or CMDB capable of tracking patches and software versions. Tools should be tied to change management controls and have authorized check-in, check-out features. If you're checking out software, if you're doing a lot of software code development, I would encourage you to have those kind of features so you can track that. And applying some FIM wouldn't be bad either. Okay, public facing web applications. This is going to be enforced here in the future, come 2025, that you're going to have automated web application layer firewalls deployed in your environment. And if you don't have those to date, you should be starting to look at getting those tools or those appliances. Honestly, I recommend outsourcing. There's lots of companies that provide web application firewall as a service or proxy as a service to a third-party service provider, because that's just simply saying, hey, I'm going to direct all my traffic through that proxy service or through that web application firewall service before it enters into my web tier. And that's the simplest way to implement that. But if you want to take on owning a web application, more power to you. Implement that control. Make sure with that you're also implementing FIM on your payment pages. So another new requirement here is your payment pages and scripts. They now have to be authorized, and they have to have file integrity monitoring, and they have to be inventoried. So those scripts need to be inventoried. Again, this is another classic place where you want that software check-in, check-out capability closely tied to change management, and you need to have file integrity monitoring tools implemented that are alerting if anything happens to a production payment page. Another neat technique is to put some content security policy around those iframes so that you're restricting the payment provider location, so that an alternate payment gateway cannot be inserted into your e-commerce website. So just there's lots of little techniques here that we're going to be checking for here in the future. Let's see what else we got here. I'm at 30 minutes, so I got to try and wrap this up in about 15 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes here. So now we're getting into role-based access controls, requirement 7. The big one here is they want to really make sure we're taking into account user accounts, and not only user accounts, but there are also there's also service accounts and system accounts, and we want to now they're now enforcing us to do an accounts review or access review every 6 months. So my recommendation is you export all your CD systems application user list and do a privileged access and user access roles and responsibility review. And that should be tied in with your HR records to make sure there's no terminated users employed here, and that we got appropriate access based on job titles and job functions. So a lot of these new requirements here in 7 is all about that 6-month review, and the 7.25 is specific to application and system accounts. So again, adding that as well as users and privileged users to that 6-month annual review process. You also need to do a targeted risk analysis for how often you're doing those reviews and looking at that. So just keep that in mind, that we got to look at the frequency and do the impact for that. Okay, jumping down to requirement 8. Okay, the big one in requirement 8, which is the password management policy, is now they're going to be enforcing 12-character passwords. So this to me looks like it's going to take at least 90 days to implement because you want to allow your user community to naturally roll out of their existing password. And when they come time to renew their password, that you're enforcing the 12-character password at renewal there. So just make sure you're prepared for that, and that you're not doing that during your annual attestation. Okay, additional requirements for service providers. If passphrases are used as a one-time authentication factor for customer user access. So this is really applied to customers using one-time passwords. No customer really likes to change their password every 90 days. They've got so many websites that they log into and use for so many different services that they get. So if you can look at putting in like your smartphone one-time password to verify the customer's identity, or maybe use a zero trust architecture, which is this SP 800-207. Where you're getting into that more explicit endpoint, authorization and access type technology, as opposed to layered security approach. It could take forever to talk about NIST there, but just hopefully I'm pointing you down the right path. Know that for your general users, MFA is now required for all access into the cardholder data environment. So these are all your customer service agents, whether they be remote or local, they have to have multi-factor authentication. No longer is it just admins. It's now applied to all users, or remote users only. It's now applied to local users as well. So my suggestion here is everybody has smartphones, use those technologies out there that allow for one-time passwords that are tied to smartphones along with their normal password, 12-character password as well. And that when I say password, I'm talking about the token that comes with the smartphone technology, which is something you have, not two passwords, because two passwords won't cut it in an MFA world. Okay, again, they want strong MFA controls. I've come across it on a few occasions where MFA is deployed and it's applied, but there's backdoors and loopholes and ways to get around the MFA technology into the CDE, especially for admins and IT folks. So make sure that MFA is tested by a pen tester, and that there is no single factor way to get into your cardholder data environment. Make sure that cardholder data environment's locked down to VPNs, jump stations, jump boxes, and so forth, where there's only one way into the CDE. Okay, I'm at 36 minutes. Let me keep scrolling down here. Again, targeted risk analysis for the frequency, how often, let's see, password phrases for applications and system accounts are protected against misuse. It follows the changing and the periodic of passwords. So if you change your passwords for 90 days, make sure that that's tested. Let's jump down into requirement 9, which is the physical security controls. There might not be a lot of technical here, so I might just quickly go through this. Frequencies of on-site POI inspections. Again, targeted risk analysis, determine how often you do an on-site inspection. Let's go into requirement 10, which is the SIM and the SOC environment. Here you can no longer, you have to use SIM tools. No longer can you get away with having a daily audit log report be generated and emailed to you, and then you glance at the threats for the day. Now they want real-time mechanisms, real-time alerting and functions and capabilities and correlation happening based on risk ratings with CVB or industry best practice risk rating systems. So make sure you get those tools implemented appropriately. You have your targeted risk analysis for anything that isn't a critical or high alert that you're phasing those out, and that you're marking those false positive, or if they apply, or you're putting some kind of note at some point, and determine those factors there. Let me keep jumping down. Critical systems, failures of critical systems. They want more detail around this. So these security impacting systems, they want to make sure that you are promptly responding to security impacting systems, and that you're alerted and you're monitoring them, and that you've got an action plan. So the next one is all about having that action plan for common scenarios, for restoring functions, or maybe doing some level of forensics so that you can do a root cause analysis later, but also quickly restore these systems. So definitely start looking at SLAs and priorities of these critical technologies, and start coming up with response procedures for common scenarios of your critical systems. Okay, requirement 11. So here, let's see what we got here. Again, we got a targeted risk analysis for, medium and low findings that somehow they're being addressed or categorized or classified. Maybe they're false positives or something, but you need to address them. And you need to determine the frequency of how often you address them and what that business impact and likelihood is. The big one for 11 requirement for vulnerability scanning is now internal scans require authentication scanning. So this means that your scanner has to be able to log in with an administrator ID to the systems, to its targets, and test for vulnerabilities. So make sure you plan for that, it might take certain architectural and firewall rules and temporary firewall rules and change window planning and so forth to allow for those types of interactive accounts and scanning, and using those temporary IDs and passwords, and that those IDs are being disabled when they're not in use, and so forth. So just keep that in mind. That's going to take some thought process of how you do your quarterly scans. So make sure you're addressing those. Okay, let's see. So they're just now requiring multi-tenant service providers that they support their customers use for external pen tests. So if a customer wants to do a pen test because they got a shared environment, those service providers now have to allow them to do pen testing. They no longer can say, oh, you can't touch my environment or my infrastructure. They got to be prepared for that. So make sure you've got that in your service agreements with your service providers so that you can do that, or make sure that they're also doing the pen test as well. Additional requirements: intrusion detection and intrusion prevention techniques detect and prevent and address covert. So IDS and IPS now has to address malware communication channels. So just make sure your IDS tools can handle those malware detection. Change detection software mechanism. The big one which we covered earlier is your payment pages now have to have BIM in there. So they have to be able to detect that. So make sure that that's deployed on your payment pages. And with that said, I'm not even going to jump into requirement 12 because I'm at 41 minutes, and requirement 12 is mostly documented controls. I'm going to just try to quickly scroll through it. Just know that this is where the targeted risk analysis and the customized approach controls are. There are some security awareness new requirements to include new vulnerabilities and attacks and phishing type stuff. So there's some of those requirements in here. Like I said, these are mostly all documented controls, so I'm not even really addressing these. I think there's some more incident response, to make sure that we're including more technologies, more than just wireless. So just be aware of all of those types of controls are out there. But since I'm out of time, I am going to jump back into my presentation really quick and bring this presentation to an end. Okay, so we just covered a glimpse of a lot of the PCI requirements out there. these are the big highlights of the key changes to 4.0 is every domain now has a roles and responsibilities requirement that needs to be added to the security policy. We can now apply the customized approach controls to a lot of the PCI requirements. We got to allow for time for targeted PCI risk analysis assessments. So that has to happen before you start doing attestation work. Sensitive authentication data, it's mandatory encryption now, even before authorization. E-commerce, web pages, payment pages, you got to have FIM and authentication, and it's got to show integrity. And you got to inventory all of those payment application code or those payment shopping carts. 12-character passwords, SSO passwords are rotated every 90 days. Multi-factor authentication is required for everyone in the CDE. SIM no longer allows manual reviews. It has to be automated. And vulnerability scanning, the big thing is you have to be able to have a scanner that can authenticate to this targeting systems. And then inside of data governance and domain 12, we got DLP controls, and you have to know where your cardholder data is, and you have to have a process for removing cardholder data if it's discovered outside your CDE. With that said, here's where I've actually referenced and pulled all my material for this PCI data security standard. And any questions? I'll be standing by and looking for your questions on Discord. Thanks, and see ya.
Hi, I'm John Quadrino on the attack and pen team under threat. I just want to say something I'm grateful for and I really enjoy on our team is just how open everybody is. When we come up with new TTPs or new tools, people want to show off, share their skills, and teach others.
Hi, my name is Savannah Lazera, and I'm on the attack and pen team under threat management at Optiv. And I would say the things that I love the most about working on our team is the collaboration that we have with each other. We're constantly sharing new ideas with each other. We're constantly building out documentation for new attack chains. And I would say those are really big things to kind of help grow a team skill and make sure everyone's kind of at the same level.
Hi, my name is Zach Stein. I'm on the attack and pen team under threat management at Optiv. And my favorite part about working on this team is how we all work together with each other. Whether it be collaborating on an engagement or research new techniques, there's always someone there to A, have fun with, and B, learn new things from.
Hi, my name's Heather Hall. I'm on the demand and delivery team under threat. The thing I love most about my team is how we are all equals. My peers are all willing to listen, help, and take on challenges right next to me.
Hey, I'm Ari with Optiv's Attack and Pen Team. Why do I love working for the Attack and Pen Team? Because it helps me win from within.
Hi, I'm John Quadrino on the attack and pen team under threat. I just want to say something I'm grateful for and I really enjoy on our team is just how open everybody is. When we come up with new TTPs or new tools, people want to show off, share their skills, and teach others.
Hi, my name is Savannah Lazera, and I'm on the attack and pen team under threat management at Optiv. And I would say the things that I love the most about working on our team is the collaboration that we have with each other. We're constantly sharing new ideas with each other. We're constantly building out documentation for new attack chains. And I would say those are really big things to kind of help grow a team skill and make sure everyone's kind of at the same level.
Hi, my name is Zach Stein. I'm on the attack and pen team under threat management at Optiv. And my favorite part about working on this team is how we all work together with each other. Whether it be collaborating on an engagement or research new techniques, there's always someone there to A, have fun with, and B, learn new things from.
Hi, my name's Heather Hall. I'm on the demand and delivery team under threat. The thing I love most about my team is how we are all equals. My peers are all willing to listen, help, and take on challenges right next to me.
Hey, I'm Ari with Optiv's Attack and Pen Team. Why do I love working for the Attack and Pen Team? Because it helps me win from within.